Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're going to be replacing the factory doubled in on this 2001 Toyota Sienna. Now, in this install we're going to show you how to remove the factory radio. We'll head over to the bench, show you the parts that we're going to need for the install, including the radio, wiring harness, and dash kit. Then we'll come back here to get everything reinstalled. Let's get started. Now, before we dive into things, just a couple of notes here. So it has JBL on the radio logo, as well as JBL on the tweeter grill covers here on the A-pillars. So that indicates that we do have the factory amplified system, which we will want to retain. Now, if you are looking to bypass that, I can link the harness in the description. Factory amplifier is just down below behind the cup holders. Secondly, we do have steering wheel volume controls on the steering wheel up here too, and we're going to try to attempt to retain those as well with the new radio. So without further ado, what we need to do is get this guy on out. Now, to do so, it's actually fairly straightforward. It simply just clips all the way around, and then usually the radio itself is going to be held in with 10mm bolts. So what we're going to do is just use our fingers here, kind of work that out. Now, there should be enough slack where you can just lay this down. And like I said, they're going to have two 10mm on each side of the radio. Go ahead and remove those. Alright, so once those four 10mm are removed, go ahead and grab the radio, give it a tug. It should just come right on out here. Now, depending on your trim level, you're going to have some various harnesses, like so. We'll have antennas to remove, and that should be it. Now, depending on what you're installing, you may or may not need the factory brackets off the radio here. We do, since we're doing the doubled in. So let's take this guy over to the bench and start prepping our new aftermarket radio to be installed in this factory location. All right, so here at the bench, now the parts that we're going to need for the install, first and foremost, is the radio that the customer has chosen to go with. It's this Sony XAV-AX3200. Features both wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, to install that in the factory location, fortunately for us today, no dash kit is required if doing a standard doubled in, because what we're going to be doing is grabbing the brackets off the factory radio, mounting it up, and it's a traditional doubled in OEM size, which fortunately for us doesn't require any specific kit. If you are doing a single DIN, there is a version that comes with the pocket, and we can link that specific kit down in the description of the video. Wiring wise, there's going to be two different wiring versions. If you have JBL like we do, we need this wiring harness adapter. Model number is the Metro 70-8113. If you don't have JBL, you're going to need the Metro 70-1761. And again, we'll link that variant down in the description. Because we have steering wheel volume controls, we want to retain that with the new radio. Metra, via Access, actually makes this ASWC TOY-LEX. That indicates it should fit our model here to retain those steering wheel controls for our new radio. Finally, here we do have a Bluetooth mic, the harness that comes with the radio, and lastly, just to make things a little bit more interesting here, we have a flush mount USB which will take place of one of those blank spots there underneath the radio for a factory looking finish to have access to wired CarPlay and Android Auto. So we're going to install one of those as well. What we're going to do here to get started is we're going to grab our harness adapter and the harness that came with the radio. Today we're going to be soldering up our connections. Now, you don't have to solder. You can use crimp caps or butt connectors. Just don't twist and tape or use wire nuts, as they're just not designed for an automotive application. Alright, so what we've done here is we solder up our connections. Now, going to be color for color, but don't always rely on that 100%. Always connect the color based on the function of the wire, not only by the color solely. In our case, it was color for color, and we made additional special connections here. First of all, we have our accessory turn on, or the wire that turns on the radio when the key is on. We added our solid blue out of this, which is our antenna amplified turn on circuit. We just tied that into accessory because this doesn't have an antenna out, a solid blue. We also added our steering wheel volume control harness that's needed. And again, if you don't have steering wheel volume controls, that's not needed here. But this does require us to hook up both the reds into accessories, so we tied those in as well. And we also added an additional power and ground off this in case we add a backup camera, which truly we are, and that's going to be in a separate video. We have that all done. Again, we bundled all those together, soldered it into one loop here, so everybody is going to snag that same accessory signal. Same thing with the ground. We have a few grounds here all tied in. There is the black and a black with a white stripe. Generally, black with a white stripe is an amplifier ground, so we just ground that as well. All the blacks, black from the harness here, as well as the black from the radio. And because it's a Sony, we can simply just ground the parking brake. If this were to be a Pioneer or an Alpine, you'd have to use a bypass. We got our illumination. That's all soldered and connected. Constant 12 volts. That's all connected. And then we hooked up our blue white to blue white because we have the JBL. We need that JBL amp to turn on, but we also added an extra little lead off in case we had an extra amp down the road. Now finally here you'll notice that we have our speaker wire outputs that we did not hook up. Reasoning is our JBL amplifier needs a low level signal which will connect these to the radio's pre-outs or RCA outputs on the back that are non-amplified, and will send that raw signal right to our factory amplifier to play. So the internal amp built into the radio is not going to be needed. We'll just cap these speaker wires off as they won't be used in our install today. Now if you didn't have JBL, if you're using the standard 1761 harness, would certainly connect those speaker wires, and more often than not, 99% of the time, speaker wires are color for color. With that being said, what we're going to do is move our heat shrink up and over those connections, and we're going to shrink them down with a heat gun. Okay, so we finished wrapping up our harness here. Everything has been wrapped in high temperature testa tape. Just keeps everything nice and tidy and protected in the dash. Here's all our harness connectors. Now in our Sienna, we're not going to need the small guy, so that'll be unused, but we'll use this larger pin harness as well as our main JBL pin harness. These ends will plug into the RC outputs to feed our factory amplifier the audio signal it needs to play. This end plugs into the radio. This is our steering wheel control module and corresponding WR cable. This will plug into the wired remote or WR steering wheel control input on the back of the radio. Looks like an aux, it's not one. And finally, we also left off a power and ground. Are doing a backup camera, which we'll link that video specifically down in the description, and its corresponding reverse gear trigger wire. This car is old enough that there isn't one. There's no smart harness, so we have to manually feed a reverse gear trigger into this in order for that aftermarket radio to cycle over to display the image all on its own. So with this done, we can put this out of the way. Now here is our factory radio. We need to pull these brackets off and reinstall them on the new radio, and it's an 8mm or Phillips, so let's go and remove those. Alright, so we got the bracket on here. Use the hardware that came with the radio to mount that bracket to the chassis, and then we reinstalled the fine thread screws back into the factory radio. Everything else ready to go. At this point of time, we're ready to head back to the car to get everything reinstalled. Okay, so we're back here in the car. We're ready to start getting everything reinstalled. They can only go a certain way since we have JBL. We'll plug in our JBL harness. And again, like I mentioned before, we're not using the little harness, but we will use the big one for steering wheel volume controls. Now we are using a major brand radio with Sony, so it's all self-programming. We don't have to do anything with our harness adapter, and our steering wheel control module can simply just rest back behind the radio. With those connections now made, what we're going to do is finish hooking up the radio. Now our antenna adapter, it does have two, you just use the big one. There are adapters to utilize both, but with your most aftermarket radios, you won't need both, just the one. Those are all connected. Let's just simply tuck everything carefully back here in the dash, making sure everything stays connected. Now it's a good idea at this point of time, let's go ahead and boot up the radio just to ensure everything is working properly. Test our steering wheel controls. Yep, track up, track down. Everything seems to be working with steering wheel controls. They auto-programmed great. So, next here, let's go ahead and Now install our screws up and around the radio. With those now in, let's go ahead and snap our panel back in. Now up here, we were unable to utilize the full flush mount USB just because it didn't fit this location. So we popped it out of its main retainer and cut and modified one of our blanks to flush mount there just off camera. We also added an aux for the radio as well, and that all went in great. So that's about it for this radio install video. If you have a question as to what we did here, go ahead and post a comment below. Now if you want to see more on this Sienna, we did a backup camera where we installed an aftermarket camera to this aftermarket radio. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to hit the like button if you liked what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe. We post great content on the channel all the time, and we will see you in the next video.